Margaret was 71 years old. She had worked for 34 years as a bookkeeper for a mid-sized manufacturing company in Ohio. She retired at 66, collected her Social Security every month without any problems, and lived a quiet, comfortable life on her benefit plus a small pension. She had never missed a payment. She had never been late on a bill. She had done everything right. Then, one Tuesday morning, she opened her mailbox and found a letter from the Social Security Administration. It said she had been overpaid. The letter listed an amount she supposedly received in excess over a span of several months. The number was just over $4,000. Margaret assumed it was some kind of mistake. She set the letter on her kitchen counter and told herself she would call about it next week. She had seen scam letters before. She figured this might be one of those. It was not a scam. It was real. And because Margaret waited past the 30-day window the letter described, the Social Security Administration did exactly what it said it would do. On the first of the following month, her direct deposit arrived at exactly half of what it normally was. Not a small reduction. Half. The full monthly amount she depended on to pay her mortgage, her utilities, her prescriptions, and her groceries cut in half automatically with no further warning. Margaret was not reckless, she was not irresponsible. She had simply never been told that a Social Security overpayment letter comes with a specific 30-day clock, and that missing that clock has immediate, automatic, and severe financial consequences. This video is going to walk you through exactly what a Social Security overpayment letter is, what the two deadlines inside it mean, how 3 specific government forms can protect you, and what options exist even if you believe the debt is completely valid. Every piece of information I am going to share with you today comes directly from the Social Security Administration's own published guidance, their official fact sheets, and the forms they make publicly available on their website. This video is for educational purposes only and is not legal or financial advice. If you have received an overpayment notice, consult with a qualified professional or contact your local Social Security office before making any decisions about your specific situation. My name is Kevin, and this is Kevin Retire Strategy. Every week I break down the rules, the traps, and the decisions that protect retirees from situations nobody warned them about. If that sounds like something you need, hit the subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Let us start from the very beginning, because most people have never heard the term Social Security overpayment until the letter is already sitting on their kitchen counter. An overpayment happens when the Social Security Administration determines that you received more money than you were entitled to receive for 1 or more months. This can happen for a wide range of reasons. Your income changed and SSA was not notified in time. A change in your living situation was reported but not processed correctly. You returned to work and the earnings affected your benefit in ways that were not immediately adjusted. You received benefits after a change in eligibility that SSA tracked differently than you expected. Or SSA made a computational error internally and calculated the wrong amount for a period of time. The overpayment can involve Social Security retirement benefits, disability benefits, or supplemental security income, which is called SSI. The rules around what happens next are slightly different depending on which type of benefit you receive, and I am going to explain those differences clearly. When SSA determines an overpayment occurred, they send you a written notice by mail. That notice tells you the amount they believe was overpaid, the time period it covers, the reason they say it happened, and most importantly, what your options are. Here is the part most people either do not read carefully or do not fully understand. That notice comes with 2 separate deadlines, and they do 2 completely different things. Confusing them or missing either one creates serious problems. The first deadline is 30 days. SSA states in its official guidance that if you do not repay the overpayment, request a waiver, or file an appeal within 30 days of the notice, it will automatically begin withholding money from your monthly benefit to recover what it says you owe. For Social Security retirement and disability benefits, that automatic withholding is 50% of your monthly benefit. For SSI recipients, the withholding is 10% of the monthly SSI payment. This is not negotiable at that stage. It is not a warning. It happens automatically once the 30-day window closes without any action from you. That 30-day window is not when you need to finish resolving the issue. It is when you need to take some kind of documented action. Filing an appeal stops collection while SSA reviews your request. Filing a waiver request stops collection while SSA evaluates your waiver. Either of those steps, if taken within 30 days, pauses the withholding process completely until SSA makes a decision. The key word in that sentence is if. If you take no action within 30 days, collection begins automatically. No further notice, no additional grace period. The money simply does not arrive the next month at its full amount. The second deadline is 60 days. SSA gives you 60 days from the date you received the overpayment notice to formally appeal the decision. SSA assumes you received the notice 5 days after the date printed on the letter, unless you can prove otherwise. So when you count your 60 days, you start from 5 days after the date on the letter, not the date you actually pulled it out of your mailbox. This distinction matters, especially if the letter sat on your counter for a few days before you opened it. The 60-day deadline is specifically for challenging whether the overpayment actually occurred or whether the amount is correct. It is a longer window than the 30-day window, but both windows are running simultaneously from the moment that letter is dated. You can act on the 60-day appeal path without losing the protection of the 30-day pause, as long as you file your appeal within 30 days. And SSA specifically states that there is no time limit for requesting a waiver. That does not mean you should wait. It means that if you missed the 30-day window and collection has already started, a waiver request can still be filed and will be evaluated, and if approved, can stop or reduce future withholding. Now, let me walk you through what I call the three-form framework. This is the most important practical piece of information in this entire video. Most people who receive an overpayment letter think there is one thing they can do, which is either pay it back or argue that it is wrong. But SSA actually offers 3 completely separate paths, and each one is for a different situation. The form you choose depends entirely on how you feel about the debt itself. The first form is SSA 561, which is called the Request for Reconsideration. This form is for people who believe the overpayment itself is wrong. Maybe SSA says they overpaid you, but you do not agree that an overpayment occurred. Maybe you believe the amount they calculated is incorrect. Maybe you think the time period they identified does not match your actual payment history. If you look at that notice and your immediate reaction is that the facts are wrong, this is your form. Filing SSA 561 initiates a formal review of SSA's determination. It does not guarantee the outcome you want, but it puts your disagreement on the record and triggers a process where SSA must review the decision before collecting. SSA makes this form available on its Forms portal, and it can be submitted online through that portal. The second form is SSA 632BK, which is the Request for Waiver of Overpayment Recovery. This form is for people who do not necessarily dispute that an overpayment happened, but who believe they should not have to pay it back. SSA allows for a waiver in specific circumstances, and understanding those circumstances is critical because many people qualify and never know it. SSA states that a waiver can be granted when 2 conditions are both true. The first condition is that the overpayment was not your fault. The second condition is that repayment would either prevent you from meeting your ordinary and necessary living expenses, or that requiring repayment would be against equity and good conscience. Both conditions must apply. You cannot waive simply because repayment would be hard. You also need to show that the overpayment was not something you caused or contributed to. The not at fault condition is where many retirees underestimate their position. SSA's own internal guidance describes situations where a person may not be considered at fault even when they received excess payments. If you reported a change in your circumstances to SSA and SSA continued to pay the old benefit amount anyway, that is not your fault. If SSA made a computational error in calculating your benefit, that is not your fault. If you received payments during a period when SSA had information about a change but did not act on it in time, that may also not be your fault. SSA has a process for evaluating this based on the specific facts of each person's situation. If any of those scenarios sounds like your situation, the waiver path is worth pursuing. For overpayments of $2,000 or less, SSA states that a waiver request can be made by phone or by visiting a local SSA office. You do not necessarily need to submit the full written form for smaller amounts. For larger overpayments, submitting SSA 632BK in writing creates the clearest paper trail and the most complete protection. The third form is SSA 634, which is the request for change in overpayment recovery rate. This form is for people who accept that they were overpaid and are willing to repay, but who cannot afford the rate at which SSA is collecting. If SSA is withholding 50% of your monthly check, and that level of withholding is preventing you from paying your rent, your utilities, your food, or your medications, you can ask SSA to reduce the withholding amount to something more manageable. The SSA 634 form itself states it is specifically for situations where the current withholding rate prevents you from meeting necessary living expenses. SSA has stated in its published guidance that repayment plans can be established at amounts as low as $10 per month in cases of genuine financial hardship. That is not a rumor or a workaround. That is what SSA's official guidance says. If you are in a situation where the debt is real, you accept it, but you cannot survive on half your benefit, SSA 634 is the form that gives you back some control over the pace of repayment. All three of these forms, SSA 561, SSA 632BK, and SSA 634, are real, current, official SSA forms. They're listed on SSA's Forms portal. Several of them can be submitted online. They are not complicated documents, but they are documents you must know exist in order to use them. I want to spend a moment on the waiver path specifically because it is the one most retirees dismiss without fully understanding it, and it is often the one that provides the most meaningful relief. A waiver is not an emotional appeal. It is a structured legal request based on two specific criteria that SSA evaluates by looking at your financial situation and the circumstances that led to the overpayment. SSA uses two specific standards when evaluating waiver requests. The first is whether repayment would defeat the purpose of the Social Security Act. This means repayment would take away income or resources you need for basic living expenses, such as food, housing, medical care, and other necessities. The second is whether repayment would be against equity and good conscience. This is a broader standard that looks at whether demanding repayment is simply unfair given the specific circumstances of how the overpayment occurred and what the person knew or could have known at the time. If you genuinely reported changes to SSA and SSA continued to pay the wrong amount, that is the kind of situation the waiver process exists to address. SSA requires you to document your financial picture when you file SSA 632BK, including your income, your expenses, and your assets, so that it can evaluate whether repayment would create genuine hardship. Filling out that form honestly and completely gives SSA the information it needs to make a fair decision. Skipping that form entirely because you assume you do not qualify costs you the only opportunity you had to stop the collection. Now I want to address something that matters deeply and that most overpayment explanations never talk about. What happens if you are someone who truly cannot afford to fight, who does not have the energy or the resources to gather documents and file forms, but who also cannot afford to live on half of your Social Security benefit for an extended period? The answer is that you still have options, but timing determines how many of them remain available to you. If you are reading this and you have already received an overpayment notice, your most urgent action is to count backward from the date on that letter to figure out exactly how many days you have remaining. If you still have time inside the 30-day window, any one of the three forms I described, filed before that window closes, will pause collection while SSA reviews your request. If the 30-day window has already closed and collection has started, SSA 634 can still be filed to request a lower repayment rate, and SSA 632B can still be filed to request a waiver, which, if granted, can stop future withholding and in some cases result in restoration of what was withheld. The practical reality is that many of the retirees who end up in the worst situations, losing half their check for months without understanding why, are people who received the letter, recognized SSA's return address, and still waited. Not because they were careless, because they did not know that the letter came with an automated financial consequence that did not require any further action from SSA to take effect. SSA does not call you before it starts withholding. It does not send a second warning letter. It does not give you an extension because you were unsure whether the letter was legitimate. The clock on that notice runs from the date it was sent, and when the clock expires, the withholding starts automatically. This is the piece of information that Margaret in Ohio did not have when she set that letter on her kitchen counter and decided to deal with it later. There is one more piece of this that I want to address before I give you the action checklist, because it comes up in almost every situation involving overpayments, and it catches people off guard in a very specific way. If your overpayment involves SSI rather than Social Security, retirement, or disability, the withholding rate at 10% is lower, but the eligibility rules for waiver and appeal are essentially the same. You still have the 30-day window to stop automatic collection, you still have the 60-day window to formally appeal, and you still have access to SSA 561, SSA 632BK, and SSA 634 depending on your situation. The lower withholding rate for SSI does not mean the stakes are lower. SSI recipients are, by definition, people with very limited income and resources, which often means that even a 10% reduction in monthly income creates serious hardship. The forms and the process are the same. The urgency is just as real. Let me now give you the complete action checklist for what to do if you receive a Social Security overpayment notice. Step 1. Open the letter the day it arrives and look at the date printed on it. SSA calculates that you received it 5 days after that date. Count forward from that assumed receipt date and mark the 30-day and 60-day deadlines on your calendar immediately. These are not soft targets. They are hard deadlines with automatic consequences if missed. Step 2. Read the entire letter carefully. Identify the amount SSA says was overpaid, the time period it covers, and the reason SSA gives for why the overpayment occurred. Write these down in plain language so you understand exactly what SSA is claiming. Step 3. Decide which of the 3 situations applies to you. If you believe the overpayment did not happen, or the amount is wrong, your path is SSA 561. If you accept that it happened, but believe you should not have to repay it because it was not your fault, and repayment would cause genuine hardship or would be unfair, your path is SSA 632BK. If you accept the debt and are willing to repay it, but cannot afford the automatic 50% withholding rate, your path is SSA 634. These paths are not mutually exclusive. You can file a waiver request and a reconsideration request at the same time if both apply to your situation. Step 4. Gather any documentation that supports your position. If you are filing SSA 561, gather records that show your payment history, any correspondence with SSA, or any documentation about the period in question. If you are filing SSA 632BK, gather documentation of your monthly income, your monthly expenses, and your assets, because SSA needs this to evaluate hardship. If you are filing SSA 634, gather documentation of your necessary monthly expenses and why the current withholding rate makes it impossible to cover them. Step 5. Submit your form or forms before the 30-day deadline. Use SSA's online forms portal at ssa.gov if that is accessible to you. You can also submit forms by mail to your local Social Security office, or you can deliver them in person. Whatever method you use, get confirmation that the form was received. Keep copies of everything you submit. Step 6. After submitting, follow up with your local SSA office to confirm that your request is in the system and that collection has been paused while your request is under review. SSA is required to pause collection while a timely appeal or waiver request is being evaluated, but confirming that the system reflects this gives you peace of mind and a record of the conversation. Step 7. If SSA denies your waiver or appeal, read the denial letter carefully. A denial is not necessarily the end of the process. There are further levels of review available, and understanding why SSA denied the request tells you whether the denial is based on facts that can be challenged or circumstances that genuinely do not meet the waiver criteria. The retirees who navigate overpayment situations successfully are not necessarily the ones who had the strongest legal arguments. They are the ones who responded quickly, used the right form for their situation, and did not assume the process would wait for them to be ready. Margaret from Ohio, the bookkeeper who let the letter sit on her counter for 2 weeks, eventually did get some of her benefit restored. But it took her 4 months to work through the process, and during those 4 months, she was living on half of what she expected. She had to borrow money from her daughter. She missed 2 credit card payments for the first time in her life. None of that would have happened if someone had explained to her before that moment that the letter in her mailbox was not something that could wait until next week. If you are watching this video right now and you have not yet received an overpayment notice, you are in the best possible position. You have time to understand this process before it applies to you. Share this video with any retirees you know who depend on Social Security, not because overpayments are common, but because the people who know what to do when that letter arrives are the ones who do not lose half their check for months before figuring out that the situation could have been handled differently from day one. If you are watching this video and there is a letter from SSA sitting somewhere in your house right now that you have not fully read or responded to, stop this video, go find that letter, and look at the date on it. Count forward 5 days, then count forward 30 more. That is the date that determines whether the next step is yours to take or whether SSA takes it for you. The 3 forms I described today are SSA 561, SSA 632BK, and SSA 634. They are free. They are available at ssa.gov. And for the retiree who uses the right one at the right time, they are among the most valuable documents in the entire Social Security system. This is Kevin's retirement strategy. If this video gave you information you had not had before, hit the like button right now and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss a video. I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you or someone you know ever received an SSA overpayment notice? Tell me what happened, how you handled it, and whether you knew about the 30-day window before today. I read every single comment. The situations you describe become the videos I make next. This is Kevin Retirement Strategy.